Valencia didn't think about death too often. If anything, everyone else thought about it too little, too lightly. After all, there were a lot of people in the world, and every single one of them had to die at some point, no two in exactly the same way and place and circumstance. Maybe standing in line at a bank at the hands of a robber. Maybe stretched out on an operating table under bright white lights and flashing surgical steel. In a hospital bed with families standing around, looking sad and saying comforting things. Or on an airplane. Or in a garden. Or crossing a street, maybe jaywalking. Murdered, sick, fatally clumsy. Oslo, Norway, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, outer space. She wasn't immortal, and she knew it, that was all. The part that was, perhaps, excessive or unhealthy was the way she thought about death. And the way she thought about death was the way she thought about everything else, in graphic detail and at inopportune moments, and in sticky, cyclical loops. She'd be walking down the street and see a speeding car, and she'd think, that car is driving too fast, and that was all it took. Her brain would grab the thought and shut like a fist, and she'd spend the next hour or so picturing her body cracking against the front of the car like a giant egg. Afterward, she'd feel as battered and tired as if she had, in fact, been run over and into repeatedly. It wasn't that Valencia believed she would die that way, she just couldn't stop picturing it. And if it wasn't a car, it was a sharp edge, a high-up ledge, a flash of lightning in the distance. Every day supplied her with endless possible deaths, hundreds of awful scenarios for her brain to clutch and need. The only way she could get herself to stop thinking about being hit by a car, or burning alive in her bed, or falling and hitting her head on the corner of something, was to picture in great detail the place where she was actually going to die, West Park Services call center, where she worked as a debt collector. The thought of it soothed her, not because it was a good job or because she liked it there, but because it was so bland and boring that her active imagination couldn't do anything with it. The call center was a massive warehouse full of cubicles. The walls looked beige or pink or brown, depending on the time of day, depending on the way the light hit them, and no one had made any kind of effort to hang art or pick out nice curtains for the windows. The point was not to look at the walls and windows. The point was to be contained by them, to do work within them. It felt, at times, like a jail. The only sounds in the building were shuffling feet and hundreds of hushed, one-sided telephone conversations. It smelled deceptively surface clean, like they'd only sort of made an attempt at covering up the stale air and body odor. Everyone seemed either uneasy or bored. In some ways, it was less like a penitentiary and more like a hospital. You got a feeling of dread in your stomach when you walked in. You got the sense that the people inside were all sick or dying or dead. The cubicle walls were thin and short, barely enough to separate Valencia from the men who sat on either side of her. Even still, in the 17 years she'd been at West Park, she hadn't ever met them, and she hadn't wanted to meet them, and they hadn't seemed to want to meet her either. One smiled slightly in her general direction to acknowledge her existence every now and then, while the other stared straight ahead at all times. They were middle-aged, and they wore heavy-looking glasses and had mustaches, maybe to make up for the lack of hair on the tops of their heads, or maybe because of some sort of middle-aged man peer pressure, if that was a thing middle-aged men still struggled with. They were like somewhat mismatched bookends. Everyone else at West Park blurred together into a huge, chaotic mass when she dared to glance around. But in her mind, they all looked the same as the bookend men, and they all moved in perfect synchronization.